Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Good morning. We are very happy today to have Swami Nishpapananda talking to us. He's staying with us for 2 weeks, and we are very grateful that he has come. He's a monk of the Ramakrishna Order of India and a Swami in residence at the Vedanta Society of St. Louis, where he's resided since 1974. He became interested in Vedanta through college coursework and joined the order in 1981 and received final monastic vows in India in 1995. A graduate of Washington University, Swami Nishpapananda manages the book and multimedia publications of the Vedanta Society and is active in interfaith work in the St. Louis area. He's also a well-known and popular speaker at many Vedanta centers all over the United States and at universities throughout the country. He has some wonderful videos on the St. Louis YouTube channel, and you should certainly check them out. The subject of his talk today is Regain Your Own Empire. He will be taking Q&A afterwards and will be seated at the back of the chapel afterwards to accept pranams. Swamiji, welcome.
Unlike your Swami, I use notes. Thank you, Diane. One correction on the introduction. At the last part, mentioning the YouTube videos, it's always been my aim to keep a very low internet profile, and so far I've been wildly successful. So, so don't get excited about that thing. I'm delighted to be here and grateful to Swami Sarvapriyananda for inviting me and letting me stay in his room, which was previously occupied by such exalted Swamis of blessed memory, Swami Bodhananda, Swami Pavitrananda Ji, Swami Tathagatananda Ji. The last time I was in New York was 25 years ago, and I remember sitting in Swami Tathagatananda Ji's room and saying that I was, out of change for the bus, and I understood they only accepted exact fare, and I was wondering if I could get some change from him. And he got excited, as he was wont to do, and said, there are 1 billion people in India, and we get a handful of sannyasins every year, and you're from the West, from this entirely different culture, and you've announced the world and dedicated your life to the ideals of Ramakrishna and Vivekananda. I said, here, take it all. Anyway, Swami Sarvapriyananda, your Swami, is doing a great service for our order. Almost all of the new people that come through our doors at the Vedanta Society in St. Louis have listened to his talks on YouTube, and he's doing this service for the whole order. So, again, I'm just very happy to be here and to meet all of you. Jiminy. All right. Now, the talk today is Regain Your Own Empire. Long ago, in ancient India, there lived a king who ruled over the magnificent city of Smritinagar, which in Sanskrit means the city of memory. One day the king, who was an avid and excellent hunter, saddled his magnificent white horse and left the kingdom before dawn to go hunting alone. He rode through his extensive land, and crossing the border of his kingdom entered a dense forest. As he rode, a snake suddenly came across the path, startling the horse, who reared and threw the king violently to the ground. When he awoke hours later, he had no memory of who he was or where he was, and the horse returned riderless to the kingdom. Since he was dressed as a hunter, he assumed he was a hunter. And he made himself a rough shelter and lived for some time as a hunter. Yet, despite his excellence in hunting, he was not satisfied. Somehow he didn't feel he was a hunter. He was troubled by a recurring dream. At night when he went to sleep, he would have this dream that he lived in a magnificent palace, surrounded by riches, attended by his beautiful queen and his loving children, and adored by his subjects. But when he woke up, he found himself lying on the floor of his hut. One day the king met a merchant in the forest and decided to tell the merchant of his recurring dream. I see, said the merchant. You want to be rich. You should become a merchant like me. You can be rich then and live like a king. The king thought this advice sounded good. He went to the city and bought some cloth to sell in the market. Unfortunately, the king was an abysmal merchant and he soon went broke. The dream continued. Returning to the forest, he met a soldier. And hearing his dream, the soldier told him, you should become a soldier like me. Nothing like shoe leather. With martial skills, you can take a kingdom by force. But when the hunter tried to enlist as a soldier, he was told, too old. Can't do it. Disheartened, the hunter finally met a sadhu, a holy man. Seeing him, the sadhu said, Your Majesty, where have you been? Your entire kingdom has been praying for your return. The hunter was baffled and said, I don't know what you're talking about, but I am having this strange dream. Every night when I go to bed, I'm in this magnificent palace, surrounded by riches, with the most exquisitely beautiful and adoring queen, and wonderful children and adoring subjects. And every morning I wake up a poor hunter in a hovel. My child, have no fear. I can make your dream come true. All you need to do is hire a white horse with a silver saddle, ride into the neighboring kingdom of Smritinagar, and proclaim yourself the lost king. The hunter was dubious. And so the sadhu added, obviously dubious. And so the sadhu added, My austerity has given me the power to confer hypnotic speech. By the force of my austerity, everyone who hears your words will believe you. Well, the king was a pious man, so the hunter was a pious man. He hired a horse with a silver saddle and rode into the neighboring kingdom, apprehensively. When he ran into a contingent of soldiers, he summoned his courage and said, I am the lost king of Smritinagar, and to his astonishment, the soldiers, as one, dismounted and bowed low before him. His faith in the sadhu's words increased considerably. And as he rode into the city proclaiming his identity, the king was greeted everywhere with jubilation. Soon he saw the palace looming before him, and his memory returned. He realized that he really was the lost king of Smritinagar, the city of memory. Regaining his kingdom, the king lived happily and reigned wisely for many years. Now, every religion's tradition has its teaching stories, and this one nicely illustrates two of Hinduism's tenets. First, that we are heirs to a glorious kingdom, and second, that we are suffering from spiritual amnesia, which prevents us from claiming it. So I want to go through this story again and kind of point out a few things. And then we'll go to the lecture of Swami Vivekananda, where I first became acquainted with this phrase of the attainment of our lost empire, or more directly, retaining our own empire. Smritinagar, the city of memory. It's very poetic. When the king awoke after being knocked unconscious on the footpath, he had no idea who he was or where he was. He had retrograde amnesia. And he lost, in retrograde amnesia, you lose your episodic memory, which means the personal details of your life, your name, where you live, your loved ones, your personal experiences. So he had no idea who he was or where he was. And in retrograde amnesia, normally it's the events immediately preceding the concussion that are wiped out, and then they'll come back after a while. But occasionally, people lose everything. It's all wiped out, and they don't recover it. But even though he didn't remember who he was and where he was still an excellent hunter. This is a different kind of memory. It's procedural memory. If you get retrograde amnesia and you don't lose you still know how to ride a bicycle or play the piano. That doesn't go. You know how to do a barbecue. I mean, they're different kinds of memory. So he was still a good hunter. But despite his excellence in hunting, he somehow didn't feel he was a hunter. He was dissatisfied. This is an illustration of the general human condition. The great comparative religious scholar Houston Smith once said, "There is a God-shaped hole in every human heart." And we're looking around like people working on a jigsaw puzzle to find the missing piece. The only thing that fits is God. The only thing that's going to ultimately satisfy us is God. So this is what it's illustrating. somehow he didn't feel he was a hunter, in spite of his excellence at hunting. So when we get what we think we want, when we acquire the skills to do what we want to do, somehow it doesn't fully satisfy us. There's this dissatisfaction that we somehow can't get rid of it. And the dream. This is the city of memory. It won't let us go. Magnificent palace, glorious kingdom. The glorious kingdom is our divine nature. Christ said you can't hide a light under a bushel. You take a bushel basket and you put it over a light, the old-fashioned bushel baskets that could hold apples but not water, so there are chinks there, and you can't hide a light under a bushel. So the divine reality is hidden by our ignorance, but not completely. Little bits of light will peep through now and then. The light may be faint, and the hints have to be strong before we try to get back to this city of memory and to find that divine light that's hidden under the bushel. So he tried being a merchant. Maybe that'll fill the God-shaped hole inside. Well, he wasn't good at that. It didn't work. The soldier, that didn't work. And the sadhu, Your Majesty, where have you been? Your whole kingdom has been praying for your return. What? Me? I'm a hunter living in a hovel. Yet somehow, the king was a pious man, so the hunter was a pious man. And he rented the white horse with the silver saddle and summoned his courage and said, I am the lost king of Smritinagar. Proclaim your divinity, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary. And he did. And the soldiers bowed, and the closer he got to the city, the more jubilation there was. And when he finally saw the palace, he realized, his memory returned, he realized God. And he reigned happily for a long, long time. That means eternally, eternal bliss. So it's a nice story.
Is it a real story from Hindu tradition?
Is it a real story from the Hindu tradition? Yes.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah. But Hinduism has a million stories. So, in 1896, November 5th, Swami Vivekananda was in London, and he was giving a series of talks on the Upanishads. And one of them, delivered November 5th, 1896, is called The Freedom of the Soul, and was later incorporated in Jnana Yoga. Now he's speaking here to the intellectual elite of London in the heart of the British Empire. As a citizen of a subjected country, India, and the representative of a heathen religion. And it's hard to imagine the boldness, the courage, the strength that he had to speak as he did on that platform. He's speaking ostensibly about the Chandogya Upanishad in this talk, but he's so full of his realization, of his own realization, and his mission and message to the West and to the world, that keeps coming out in the talk. The Chandogya Upanishad is one of the older Upanishads, and the language very archaic, unlike the Katha Upanishad, which he just talked about. One has to wade sometimes through quite a mass of unnecessary things to get at the essential doctrines. The ritualistic nature of the Vedas has greatly influenced this old Upanishad. There is, however, one great gain in studying the very old Upanishads. You can trace, as it were, the historical growth of spiritual ideas, in that the Upanishads were carried down with great fidelity through centuries in an oral tradition. Commentators came and tried to smooth down the contradictions and bring out wonderful new ideas from the old things. They tried to find spiritual ideas in even the most ordinary statements. But the texts remain, and these texts are the most wonderful historical subject. We know that in scriptures of every religion, changes were made to suit the growing spirituality of later times. One word changed here, another there. This probably was not done in the Vedic literature, or if done, in an almost imperceptible way. So we get the great advantage of seeing how from materialistic ideas, finer and finer spiritual ideas evolved until they attained their greatest height in the Vedanta. Now he moves into an analogy. As in the West, we find in the political development of Western nations the prominent fact that Western nations cannot bear absolute rule. They're advancing to higher and higher democratic ideas. So too, in Indian metaphysics, the multiplicity of gods gave way to one God of the universe. And in the Upanishads, there's a rebellion even against that one God, against monotheism. The idea was unbearable, not only that there should be many governors of the universe ruling human destiny, but also that there should be one person ruling this universe. The idea grows until it attains its climax. In almost every Upanishad, we find the climax coming at last in the dethroning of this God of the universe. The personality of God vanishes, and impersonality comes. God no more a person, no more a human being, however magnified and exaggerated, who rules this universe. God has become an embodied principle in everything and being, immanent in the whole universe. Concomitant with this, the personal human being is broken down, and the human being as principle built up. The person is only a phenomenon. The principle is behind it. Thus, from both sides simultaneously, we find the breakdown of personalities and the approach towards the impersonal principle. The personal God approaching the impersonal, the personal human being approaching the impersonal. The gradual convergence of the two advancing lines, of the impersonal divinity and the impersonal divinity within each human being, at last become one. And the last word of each Upanishad is Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. There is but one eternally blissful principle, and that one is manifesting itself in and through all this apparent variety. Now, the Mahavakya of the Chandogya Upanishad is Tat Tattvam Asi, and that is the subject of his talk. But I want to digress here a bit and just talk about the Mahavakyas and their importance in Hinduism. And for this, I'll go to a book by Swami Sarvapriyananda called Methods of Knowledge, which most people never read. So this may be new to you. So he was very philosophically inclined, and he'd break his books down into subsections. I mean, every few paragraphs there'd be a subsection which would give the subject matter of what was to follow. So in this one, the subsection is the identity of the individual self, with a small s, and the supreme self, with a large s, pointing to the sole reality of non-dual Brahman, that is Advaita, is the supreme truth revealed in the Vedas. This is what Swamiji just said. So, but it goes into it in a different way. Of all the Upanishadic teachings, the most significant is the declaration of the individual, the identity of the individual self with the Supreme Self. This is the kernel of the Vedas and the fundamental discovery of the Hindu ethos. While disclosing the oneness of the individual consciousness and the universal consciousness that sustains and manifests the manifold, the Veda points to the sole reality of non-dual, non-relational, pure consciousness that Brahman is. The whole truth is contained in a terse sentence of 3 words. There are 4 such pithy sentences in the 4 Vedas, each sentence called a Mahavakya, a great saying. They are: consciousness is Brahman in the Rig Veda. I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi in the Yajurveda. Tattvamasi, thou art that in the Samaveda, and Atman is Brahman in the Atharva Veda. Each of these terse sentences declares the identity of the individual consciousness and the universal or divine consciousness. This supreme Vedic teaching imparts a twofold knowledge attainable by no other means. On the one hand, by affirming Atman, that is, the individual self, as Brahman, it removes humanity's deep-rooted misconception regarding itself, namely that humanity is bound, finite, imperfect, and mortal, and points to our true self as self-existent, self-shining, ever pure and ever free. On the other hand, by proclaiming Brahman as Atman, it removes our equally indomitable misconception regarding the Supreme Being, mainly that the Supreme Being is remote, unattainable, hidden, if not non-existent, and reveals that divinity as our innermost self ever manifest, immediate and direct through every experience, through every cognition, in waking, dreaming, and even deep sleep. Thus, what is conceived of as the farthest is revealed as nearer than the nearest. What appears to be unattainable is revealed as already attained. What is ever hidden is revealed as self-manifest. The Mahavakyas present in a nutshell the Vedic view of God, the Vedic view of human beings and the Vedic view of humanity's approach to God. It furnishes the clue to our spiritual life. By knowing who we are, we know God, the one existence in all creation. The way to the Supreme Being is an inner approach. It is the gradual realization of our innate divinity, symbolized in that story as the city of memory, our innate divinity. How does this compare? How do the Mahavakyas compare with the teaching about Brahman in the rest of the Upanishads? The teaching of the identity of the individual human being and the transcendent spiritual reality is the only direct instruction that can be given to a seeker of the highest, the all-transcendent being. There can be no other direct approach to Brahman than knowing him as one's very self. Any instruction that does not unveil Brahman as the innermost self of the human being seeking Brahman is indirect and remote. It fails to bring Brahman within the reach of the seeker. And as an illustration, and there are many, the indirect instruction about Brahman, that from which all these beings are born, that by which when born they live, that into which at the time of dissolution they enter and merge, seek that. That is Brahman. It's an indirect teaching about Brahman and how to get there. Even those Upanishadic texts, those revealed texts that relate Brahman to the seeker's self, but set forth the immense difference between the two, are indirect instructions, for they don't dispel from the seeker's mind the remoteness of that supreme consciousness. The identity of Jiva and Brahman, pointing to the absolute reality of non-dual consciousness, that is Advaita, beyond the relative order, is the central theme of the Upanishads and the fountainhead of the Vedic teachings. Pardon me as I shuffle my papers around. Our podium's laid out differently. Now, let's see where I am. Okay. So, the culmination of the Upanishads, Swamiji says, is in the Mahavakyas. The discovery of the nature of not just spiritual reality, but the nature of reality is consciousness and bliss, undivided, completely contrary to ordinary experience. But this is what Swamiji taught to the world. He didn't teach Ramakrishna. Reluctantly, he gave 2 talks on Ramakrishna. He taught Advaita. And he was criticized in India when he came back for this. And he said, if I wanted to preach my master, I could have converted half the world. But he didn't, you see. We need to understand what he did. You know, he said Advaita saved India twice from materialism. Once with Lord Buddha, once with Shankara. Buddha taught the ethical idealism of Advaita. and Shankara taught the spiritual idealism of Advaita. And what Swamiji did, he taught both. The ethical idealism of Buddha and the spiritual idealism of Shankara to the whole world for the same reason, to save us from materialism. So the culmination of the Upanishads is found here in the Mahavakyas. And then came the work of the philosophers, and he talks about that. What about the problem of evil, which is expressed more philosophically in the question, how did the one become many? There are lots of answers. And then how do you realize God? Well, you do these rituals. So all these things he talks about. How did this non-dual principle become manifold? And the best answer that India has produced is the theory of Maya, that it really has not become manifold. That it really has not lost its nature. The manifoldness is only apparent. A human being is only apparently a person, but in reality, the impersonal absolute being. God is a person only apparently, but really impersonal absolute being. Pure, free, immortal, and undying bliss. Now, at this point in the talk, Swamiji changes course. He's ostensibly talking about the Chandogya Upanishad, but his own understanding and his own realization of Advaita and his own mission to the world is bubbling up within him and starts to come out now. And he says, one idea common to all Indian systems, and I think to all religions, whether they know it or not, is that what I would call the divinity of humanity. There is not one system of religion, not one religion, which does not hold this idea, whether expressed in the language of mythology, allegory, or philosophy, that the human soul, whether it be, whatever its relation to God, is essentially pure and perfect. Its real nature is blessedness and power, not weakness and misery. This great idea that seems to me to be clear and that comes out through masses of superstition in every country and in every religion is the luminous idea that each human being is divine, that divinity is our nature. You see, it's our nature. And whatever else comes is a superimposition. Something has been superimposed, but that cannot kill the divine nature. In the most degraded and in the most saintly, that divine nature is ever present. It has to be called out, and it will work itself out. We have to ask, and it will manifest. I am the lost king of Smritinagar. I am the lost queen of Smritinagar. I am the lost princess of Smritinagar. I am the lost prince of Smritinagar. We have to have the boldness, as the king did in the story, to assert our divine nature. And then we'll find that the soldiers bow, that the people are jubilant, that we regain our lost kingdom. Swamiji continues, the soul is one with freedom, one with existence, one with knowledge. Sat Chit Ananda, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. So, knowledge, however it manifests itself, either as ignorance or as learning, is but a manifestation of that one same eternal, infinite consciousness. The difference is only in degree, not in kind. Between the knowledge of the lowest worm that crawls under our feet and the highest genius that the world has produced is one of only degree, not of kind. The Vedantic thinker boldly says also that the enjoyments of this life, even the most degraded joys, are but manifestations of that one divine bliss, the Ananda, the infinite bliss, the essence of the soul. The divinity of human beings seems to be the most prominent of all the religions in the Vedanta. It's explicitly stated. But it appears to Swamiji that every religion holds it. And to illustrate that this universal principle about the divinity of the soul is present, he goes through a few religions. Take the Bible, for instance. You find there the allegorical statement that the first man, Adam, was pure and that afterwards his purity was obliterated by his evil deeds. It's clear from this allegory that the Hebrews thought that the original nature of man was perfect and that the impurities, the weaknesses that we feel, are but superimpositions of our real nature. You know, Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden and at ease in God's presence. But when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, something changed and they shrank. They were no longer comfortable in God's presence. But their original nature was divine. They felt comfortable walking with God. So too with the Buddhists. They believe in a state called nirvana, which is beyond the relative world. And nirvana is exactly the same of the Brahman of the Vedantists, and the whole system of Buddhism is founded upon the idea of regaining that lost state of nirvana, the lost kingdom. In every system we find this doctrine that you cannot get anything which is not already yours. You're indebted to no one. You claim your own birthright. It's your own kingdom, for gosh sakes. You know, you're just asserting your property rights. As it has been poetically expressed by a great Vedantist in the title of one of his books, Swarajya Siddhi, the attainment of our own empire. That empire is ours, says Swamiji. We've lost it, apparently, and we have to regain it. Now, I thought, well, that's easy. I'll just get an English translation of Swarajya Siddhi and give a talk. Well, I couldn't find an English translation. Partial translations. And reading those, I thought, no, that's not going to work because, you know, in the old days, in order to establish the unreality of relative existence, they had to go through very fine logic chopping. And because it's not apparent. I mean, we're lucky now in a sense because science has shown us that the objective world, the world we experience through the senses, is a construct. It's not reality. It's how we're genetically programmed and socialized to experience reality, but it's not reality. Anyone who pays attention in high school can figure that out. But in the old days, in order to establish that, you had to be a very careful thinker, and that's what was going on in the sections of this book that I read in English. And I thought, well, you know, we're so lucky that we had Swamiji to get rid of all this stuff and just talk about it. So I'll go to Swamiji. And then he goes through all the methods that the religions teach. Well, you have to eat this food and avoid that food, and you have to do this ritual, and you have to do these things every day, and so on and so forth. And then you'll get back your lost kingdom. He said, but the last and greatest counsel is that we need not weep at all. Why do you weep, my friends? We need not go through all these ceremonies. We need not take any notice of how to regain our empire, because we never lost it. We are pure already. We're free already. If we think we're free at this moment. And if we think we're bound, bound we shall be. Remember, he's talking as a subject nation to the rulers of the empire. This is a very bold statement to people that were brought up on sin and sinner and salvation. This is a very bold statement, and as I told you at the beginning of these talks, I shall have to speak to you very boldly. It may frighten you now, but when you think it over and realize it in your own life, then you will come to know that what I say is true. In other words, when you realize God, you'll know what I say is true. I'm going to tell you the truth and the highest truth, in spite of your preconceived notions about what truth is. And then he talks about the freedom of the soul. Freedom means independence of anything outside, and that means that nothing outside can work without a cause. Nothing outside of the soul can work upon it as a cause. Now, I don't mean the soul as it's commonly thought of, as the mind and one's past impressions that leave the body at the time of death. That's the subtle body. When he says soul here, he means the divine consciousness, the indwelling consciousness. So he's saying the Atman is causeless, and from this follow all the great ideas that we have. If it be true that the soul is free, it follows that nothing can affect it, that it can never die. Freedom, immortality, and blessedness have meaning only if the soul, if the Atman, is beyond causation. The solution, Swamiji says, is that we are not bound. We're free right now. Not only so, but to say or think that we are bound is dangerous. It is a mistake. It is self-hypnotism. As soon as you say, I am bound, I am weak, I'm a hunter living in a hovel, in a poor, miserable condition, I'm helpless, woe unto you. You rivet one more chain. Don't say it, don't think it. I have heard of a man who lived in a forest and used to repeat day and night, Shivoham, I am the Blessed One. And one day a tiger fell upon him and dragged him away. The people on the other side of the river saw this and heard the voice, so long as voice remained in him, saying, Shivoham, even in the jaws of the tiger. There have been many such human beings. There have been many who, while being cut to pieces, have blessed their enemies. I am he, and so art thou. I am pure and perfect, and so are my enemies. You are he, and so am I. This is a position of strength. Wonderful is the idea of the personal God apart from nature whom we worship and love. Sometimes the idea is very soothing, but says the Advaita, that feeling is something like the effect that comes from an opiate. Now I wonder, this is kind of Marx's idea. This is something like the effect that comes from an opiate, not natural. It brings weakness in the long run, and what the world wants today, more than it ever did before, is strength. It is weakness, says Vedanta. It is weakness that is the cause of all misery. Weakness is the one cause of suffering. We become miserable because we're weak. We lie, we steal, we kill. We commit other crimes because we're weak. We suffer because we're weak. We die because we're weak. Where there is nothing to weaken us, there is no death or sorrow. Now, is Swami Vivekananda giving us a pep talk? Is he like the logical positivists, saying be strong and positive, be of good cheer, like the power of positive thinking? No, far from it. And for this, I want to go to Swami Bhajanananda, who's now one of the vice presidents of our order, and in 1986 was editor of the Prabhupada Bharata. And he talks about this very section in an editorial entitled Vedanta and the Courage to Be. One of the most striking aspects of the message of Swami Vivekananda is the great emphasis that it lays on strength and fearlessness. Few people realize that for Swami Vivekananda, strength is an essential aspect of that impersonal divine reality. When Swami Vivekananda spoke of strength or courage, his intention was not to give a sort of pep talk. His primary aim was to teach a metaphysical principle having immense practical application in day-to-day life. Great men like Vivekananda seldom make offhand or ad hoc statements for any temporary benefit. What they say or write springs from their experience of reality with a capital R in the depths of their being, and is therefore rooted in that reality. For Vivekananda, strength or fearlessness is a virtue only because it is a manifestation of an essential aspect of ultimate reality. Before Swamiji came on the scene, strength or courage had not been given a central place in Hinduism, either in the scheme of moral values or in the metaphysical approaches to reality. True, the Upanishads define ultimate reality as fearless, but this concept was not incorporated into any of the philosophical systems that later arose in India. Those philosophical systems were chiefly concerned with the essential and static nature of reality as Satchit Ananda. Vivekananda's outlook was that of an existentialist, his chief concern being the dynamic aspect of that reality, revealed in experience and encountered in human existence. This is an active age, not a contemplative age. And the medicine has to be according to the disease. A lot of doctors here. It's a good way to express it. The important point to note is that for Swamiji, strength or courage was not one of the several virtues. Rather, strength and courage is the basic parent virtue without which the practice of others is not possible. And then he quotes from the section that we just read, Bhajanananda does. It is weakness, says Vedanta, which is the cause of all misery. Weakness, the cause of all suffering. We lie, we steal, kill, and commit crime because we're weak. We die because we're weak. We suffer because we're weak. He considered strength to be the central point in the message of the Upanishads. Strength is what the Upanishads speak to me from every page. It is the only literature in the world where you find the word abhi, fearless, used again and again. The Upanishads are a mine of strength. There lies strength enough to invigorate the whole world. Yeah. He found the central message of the Gita also to be strength. He said the whole message of the Gita can be found in verse 3, chapter 2, where Krishna says to Arjuna, who's overcome with despair and half lying in the chariot, lying down, yield not to unmanliness, O son of Pritha. It does not become thee. Stand up like a hero and fight. In this one shloka lies embedded the whole message of the Gita. So, there are certain existential limits beyond which ordinary life can't take us. Dharma and artha, virtue and wealth, can only take us so far. They can't deal with guilt, meaninglessness, and death. All the schools of Vedanta regard the Atman as self-luminous, eternally pure and blissful. It is totally different from and transcendent to the mind. Hence, it cannot be tainted by the impurities of the mind. When confronted with the guilt, the soul, that means the Atman percolating through the psychophysical system, when confronted by guilt, the soul can say, I am pure and blissful, and no sin can touch me. When confronted by emptiness and meaninglessness, the soul can say, I am full of consciousness, and by virtue of that, every experience is meaningful. When confronted by the fate of death, the soul can say, I am immortal, and death is only an event in my unbroken existence. So we've got just a bit more, and we'll be done with this particular talk that Swamiji gave in 1896. No, hold on here. He says, Advaita Vedanta is the simplest form in which you can put the highest truth. India made the mistake of looking at the intricate logical and philosophical process through which the simple truth of Advaita is established, and thinking that it could not be made understandable to the average person, that it could not be made practical in everyday life. That non-dualistic ideas preached and taught widely would bring weakness and immorality because the average person could not understand or live up to these teachings. On the contrary, I have reason to believe that Advaita, non-duality, is the only remedy there is to the problems we face as human beings. If Advaita is the truth, that we're all pure, why not at this moment teach it to the whole world? Why not teach it with the voice of thunder to every person that is born, to saints and sinners, men, women, and children, to the person on the throne, to the man sweeping the streets? This is Vivekananda's message to the West, the dynamic aspect of non-dual spirituality experienced in every moment of life. And he gives us a mantra. He says, dualistic ideas have ruled the world long enough. Why not make a new experiment? It may take ages for all minds to receive Advaita, but why not begin? If we have told it to 20 people in our lives, we've done a great work. When we have no one to grope towards, no devil to lay the blame on, no personal God to carry our burden, when we alone are responsible, then we rise to our highest and best. And here he gives us the mantra. I have neither death nor fear, neither caste nor creed, neither father nor mother, nor birth, neither friend nor foe, for I am existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. I am the blissful one. I am the blissful one. He's not emphasizing the static aspect of Satchidananda. He's emphasizing the existentially viable aspect of non-duality. I am the blissful one. I am the blissful one. I'm not bound by virtue or vice, by happiness or misery. Pilgrimages and books and ceremonials can never bind me. I have neither hunger nor thirst. This body is not mine, nor am I subject to the superstition and decay that come with it. I am existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. I am the blissful one. I am the blissful one. Now, does this mean that we should give up our chosen ideal of God? That we should give up our Ishta? No. Swami Vivekananda himself said, when I feel good, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. When my stomach hurts, it's ma. Now, he says, nothing gives us such strength as the idea of monism. Nothing makes us so moral as the idea of monism. Nothing makes us work so well at our best and highest as when all the responsibility is thrown on our own shoulders. Now notice, he says nothing gives us such strength as the idea of monism. Nothing makes us so moral as the idea of monism. What's he saying? This is the highest truth. And instead of putting it off in the corner and saying common people can't understand it, he's saying everyone should break their heads on this. Everyone should understand it as far as reason can take them. And based on that, with a working faith in the reality of the non-dual spiritual reality, that reality is spiritual. Spiritual means consciousness, and that consciousness is bliss, unbroken, undying. That in itself will change our lives. We can have our spiritual practice. We can pray to our Ishta. We can do all that. But to whatever extent we have a working faith in Advaita, that faith, that truth that's coming through our understanding will help us, will speed our progress along as dualists. You see? And Ramakrishna himself said that the path in this age is bhakti tinged with jnana. And Swamiji has given us non-dual mantras to assert our divinity in plain American English that everyone can understand. So, okay. So I'll close with a prayer. Purnamata Purnamidham Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This ever-changing, interdependent universe of things and beings is infinite. That self-existent, unchanging spiritual reality is infinite. This ever-changing universe, having come from that unchanging reality, that reality remains undivided, unchanged, pure, perfect, infinite. Peace, peace, peace.
When you say that weakness is the cause of suffering, and weakness is the reason we die, what do you mean by weakness causing us to die? Because death is something intrinsic to being born.
This is Cordelia Sharma. She's an intensivist. She. This is something of everyday occurrence. It's a good question. Cordelia used to live in St. Louis, so I knew she'd bother me. Weakness is the cause of death. Well, we're not strong enough to assert our divinity. If we're the body, we die. If we're the consciousness, we witness the death of the body. And if you read the voluminous accounts of the near-death experience, this is exactly what's happening. People are on the operating table, their hearts are stopped, they've been coded, and from a perspective above the body, if you read a lot of these accounts, normally they're just looking at their body in the process of dying and, observing it. See, this is the subtle body observing the gross body. The mind having left the body with all its impressions on its way out, and then they're jerked back in at some point to the body and with all the pain. But while they're observing it, the pain's gone. They're just said, oh, well, okay. So when we can assert our divinity, actually a realized soul participates in their death. They leave. They don't die. That's the position of strength, leaving. Or if they have that non-dual realization, they don't go anywhere. their good samskaras go to the people that have served them. Their bad samskaras go to the people that oppress them or whatever. And the subtle body decomposes into its constituent subtle elements, and the individual has become non-dual. They attained its true individuality. Any other questions?
Yes, Swami. Correct me if I'm wrong, or please elaborate and teach further if this is true. But the story of the city of Shmertinagar, I heard you say that it's the city of memory.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know if that is a metaphor, or is that city of memory representative of Chitta? And if so, is the divinity that we all, well, the divine nature that we all are, is that memory buried in our, deep within our consciousness? And one more part to that question, is it the holy men? Is it the sadhus like the sadhu that the king encountered? Are those people able to activate our divinity for us, so to speak? Thank you.
Well, let's start with the last part of the question, and you might have to remind me of the first part by the. But the last part of the question: do the sadhus sadhus can be people who are on the path trying to realize the divinity, or people that have already realized the divinity and are jivan muktas. So let's say in this case it's someone who's living free, has realized God and continues to live in their body. Did they activate that divinity within us? And I think the answer is yes. They wake it up. It's the most efficacious means of speeding our path towards enlightenment is association with those people. Of course, such people are quite rare, and they almost never put up a signboard, an advertisement that I'm realized. The Ramakrishna Order has produced more realized souls in the last 125 years or so than any other religious organization in India. And, in the old days when a lot of the disciples of the direct disciples were around and at Bellarmont, and someone wanted to go to a real holy man, and they'd go to one that had a reputation for being very holy and spiritually realized, they'd go and they'd talk to him, and they'd express their desire to be uplifted and enlightened by them. Oh, yes. I've been doing this a long time, and I have certain attainment. But if you really want a holy man, you should go to Swami so-and-so. And then they'd go to Swami so-and-so. Oh, well, no, not really. You should go to Swami so-and-so. So they, they're not putting up a billboard. And, they generally, there has to be some development within us to recognize them. And it's this effort that we put out on our own to fill the hollowness inside us, to really wake ourselves up, which allows us to recognize help when it comes. There's this response within us. Yeah, he's got it. I want it. You don't have to ask them if they've realized God, you feel it. And Swami Lokeshwarananda visited our center in, I think it was 1989, and Swami Chaitananda persuaded him to talk about the direct disciples of Ramakrishna, and he talked about his guru, Swami Shivananda. And he said something that struck me as very insightful. He said, you know, it's not what he said so much, but who he was. It's like the way he tilted his head, the majestic way in which he moved, the tone of his voice, the look in his eye. I can't tell you that in words, but it had the effect on me of awakening my own desire to realize God. So yeah, that's very helpful. And it gives us the faith to proclaim our own divinity and to go to the neighboring kingdom and proclaim ourselves as the lost monarch of this. I am the lost monarch of this kingdom. What was the rest of the question? It's okay. That's okay. It's okay.
So, Swamiji, my name is Pankaj, and we all are initiated into our meditation in a Guru Mantra, or some have their own way of meditation. I would like to ask a question like, is it okay to do the meditation on Aham Brahmasmi, or it will come natural on the way of on the path of the meditation at some point, like that kind of meditation?
So is your question, if you've been given a specific mantra by your guru, which is not Aham Brahmasmi or Tattvamasi, is it okay to use those mantras? Is that your question?
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Well, I think it's okay, but not as our main spiritual practice. Our rice and dal, our meat and potatoes should be the instruction from the guru. But that doesn't mean that we can't study Advaita and benefit from it. Most people are not qualified for the direct practice of realizing God through the path of knowledge. There's really, unless you have some awakening to the existence of this witness consciousness through all experience, it's very difficult to have that as without that. What do you meditate on? You know, and it becomes very dry. But if you've got a relationship with the manifestation of divinity, which uplifts you by their life and teachings and all that, and you can focus on the blissful form of your chosen ideal, it's not dry. So one shouldn't give that up. And even our swamis who were taught the non-dual path, and I say this from my own experience with Swami Satprakashananda, who was taught the direct path of knowledge by Swami Brahmananda. That also was blended. I mean, when he would chant from the Chandi during the worship of Mother Durga, I mean, the whole shrine would shake with devotion. So the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, which is really just an amplification of Ramakrishna's teachings, our syncretic approach. You know, you've got hands, got a heart, got a head, and we should use them all and put our motor in the water and try to get there. You know, and all of that willful practice using the different modes we have will enable us to purify the mind so that when we sit for meditation, it can be fruitful. So those are the four ways: hand, heart, head, and introspection through meditation. Jim, did you have a question?
Thank you. It seems to me that with our body identification, and especially as we get older and have more aches and pains, it might be difficult to declare our divinity. But it seems to me that the message of Swamiji is to express the divinity in others, so that if we look at others as the living God, as he says, that then we might escape that trap of megalomania that might result from someone not qualified to declare their divinity. At least that's the way I see it. I don't know. I just wanted to hear what you might have to say about that.
Well, that's next week's talk.
Oh, sorry.
I don't want to give it away.
Stay tuned.
Wait, stay tuned, yes.
Swamiji, pranam.
Namaste.
So people see life differently, you know, different cultures see what is right here is wrong over there and all that. Is there any universal values, you know, that we could follow to regain our empire, example?
You know, Swami Vivekananda says some startling things. Somewhere in Karma Yoga, the title of the talk is not coming to me, but he says, unselfishness is God. It's an operational definition of divinity. That requires no theological presuppositions. Unselfishness is God. So he's talking about dharma and morality and the path to God realization. It's kind of a Mahavakya. It's 3-word English sentence. Unselfishness is God. And if you look at the moral precepts of different schools within Hinduism and different religions, that's really the gist of it. And the prescriptions vary in the details. But basically, as biological creatures, we're concerned with our biological survival, and as psychological creatures, we're concerned with our ego identifications and their health and well-being. And this is not unselfishness. So it's contrary to the common view of life to be unselfish. The furthest we can go with the materialistic and biological model of human beings is enlightened self-interest. It's kind of a political ethics that's based. It's enlightened self-interest is really an enlightened form of selfishness, but it's still selfishness. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. You go along to get along. It's a political morality. And as soon as things break down, then it's over with. But unselfishness springs from the Atman. It's the only reason for unselfishness. And I remember many years ago, I think it was 1978, our center in St. Louis is about half a block from Washington University. And at that time, they had an assembly series from 11 to noon every Wednesday when there were no classes scheduled in the entire university. And they invite some national or international speaker in to speak in Graham Chapel, which is a seating capacity of 1,200. And anyone on campus that was interested could come without neglecting their studies. And they asked Joseph Campbell to speak. And he started with, this was quite a long time ago, with an AP newspaper clipping, which he took out of his pocket and read. And he said it's AP Hawaii, and there's a cliff formation, I've forgotten the name, in Hawaii, where the sea wind is funneled up a cliff at the edge of the ocean in such a way that sometimes it would come up in gale force, sometimes tornado force, some hurricane force, tremendous amplification of the wind because of the cliff formation. And it's a tourist spot because the view is beautiful. And in this AP story, someone was up at the top of the cliff and jumped off to commit suicide. And it just so happened that the wind was, when he jumped off, was coming up the cliff at terminal velocity, 120 miles an hour. And the poor guy, trying to end his life, was suspended in space. He thought, my gosh, I tried to end my life and can't even jump off a cliff. And the closest person to him was an off-duty police officer who grabbed him. And he, at that point, the wind died down a little bit, and the police officer's going off the cliff. And then someone else grabbed the police officer, and between the people on the top of the cliff and the attempted suicide, everyone got back on terra firma, and hence the AP story. So the reporter, I don't know what happened to the guy who tried to jump off the cliff, but the reporter asked the off-duty police officer, at that moment, when you were going over the cliff, why didn't you let go? And the man said, at that moment, there was no difference between him and me. This is the story that he used to introduce the conception of Atman. Because it's not true at the biological level. It's not true at the psychological level. It's less true at the psychological level than it is at the biological level. But it's absolutely true at the level of Atman. And it's an illustration that this divinity, which is our real nature, can assert itself at any time in any one of us. And that's what's going on when we are lifted up and act in this kind of unselfish, heroic manner. It means the Maya has thinned out and the Atman is asserting itself through our psychophysical nature. And in sadhus, in holy men and women, this is more activated. It's more natural. And when Sri Ramakrishna says, the expert dancer never takes a step that's out of rhythm, never takes, what do you say? Never takes a wrong step. That means a step, he's always, the expert dancer is always on the beat, on the rhythm. Well, who's the expert dancer and what's the dance? The expert dancer is the realized soul, and the dance is dharma. The expert dancer doesn't need the rules and regulations because he or she has reached the source of dharma, which is Brahman. And from that flows all ethics. So, okay, we'll continue next week.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.